Thanks so much for listening to No Lions Here with me, Big Panda.
There are moments to be tough, to be the defender, to be the one that is like, I will protect. And there's other moments where we need to take our armor off and cry our brains out because this was awful.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to No Lions Here. My name is Big Panda, and I'm a recovering sex addict. On today's show, I have a very special guest with me. Joining me is Michael Ayala-White. He is a trauma-informed certified coach through Moving the Human Spirit, an inner child recovery process specialist, and is currently pursuing further accreditation to become an associate certified coach through the International Coaching Federation. Michael has walked the path he now guides his clients through, giving him a unique perspective and ability to empathize with the challenges they face. His personal guarantee as a coach is that you will quit on yourself before he ever does. Through his coaching service, Wayward Coaching, Michael offers specialized paths focused on addiction and recovery, inner child issues, and trauma-informed coaching. His approach is rooted in creating meaningful connections with his clients, meeting them wherever they are in their personal journey, and guiding them towards recovery and self-discovery. Clients who have worked with Michael describe his coaching as transformative, helping them connect past experiences to present behaviors and guiding them through the process of healing and mindfulness. In his free time, Michael loves to stay active, enjoying sports, hiking, and spending time in nature. He's a diehard Buffalo sports fan and loves engaging in deep conversations about life. Today, we'll dive into Michael's personal story, his approach to coaching, and how he's helping individuals navigate the complexities of addiction, trauma, and the inner child work. We'll also discuss the importance of creating meaningful connections and how his earned journey has shaped his coaching philosophy. Without further ado, Michael, welcome to No Lions Here, man. Super excited to have you on. And also, I should add, also a BAI alum. Shout out to today's sponsor of this episode for the podcast. Another BAI alum, man. So welcome, man. Really excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate your platform, and thanks for allowing me to come on.
Yeah, man. No problem at all. Again, I'm still kind of blown away when I get people that reach out to me wanting to come on the show. Like I reach out to people, and what's really cool about this space and this topic in general, I think, is so many people, especially in the professional world, are willing to come on and talk about it. And so then to get someone else, who's been through the same program that I've been through, you reached out to me, and I absolutely, I'm like a kid on Christmas when I got that email from you, man. It was like, oh yeah, man, absolutely. Like, please come on. So I'm really excited to dive into your story and kind of some of the stuff that you got going on, man. So yeah, what led you to BAI?
That's a very loaded question, obviously, for sure. And so, first off, shout out to BAI and Boulder Recovery for what they do. It's unbelievable. And I'm so grateful that a space like that exists, and I'm glad that I'm sad that they're growing, but because it's necessary, I'm glad that place exists. Yeah. And so, I mean, just a little bit about some of the developmental years that kind of led me in the direction of having to find a place like BAI and Boulder Recovery. Mom and dad split when I was really, really young. And so for the first 8 months of my life, I lived with my mom and my grandfather, her father, who was a very influential person in my life, one of the stronger male figures in my life. And then when my mom's maternity leave ran out at around a year and a half, she had to go back to work. And I ended up going into daycare. And it was at that point where my little brain could not process the gap that started to grow between my mother and I. No fault of her own. If she didn't work, I wasn't eating. Like, as an adult with a fully formed brain, I can understand that now. And so there's a lot of compassion. And since being in recovery for the past 5 years, my mom and I have had the best relationship we've ever had. Shout out to her for doing her work on her side of the street beforehand, which is very, very rare to have a parent that's willing to do that. In the 5 years that I've been in recovery and the hundreds and hundreds of guys I've met in recovery and with the guys that I've worked with, I can probably count on one hand, maybe two, the amount of parental figures or guardians that are willing to do their work when confronted with parts of the story that are difficult. Not that I'm blaming or any of us are blaming, but we are naming what actually happened.
Sure.
And so shout out to my mom for that. But as a year and a half year old kid, I just could not process why my mom would want to leave me. And so somewhere between a year and 2 years old, through trauma therapy, I've been able to realize that I started to spin this narrative that something was seriously wrong with me. And so that narrative carried into grade school when I went to a small private Lutheran all-white school in the country. I live in Buffalo, New York, and so the sun is finally just starting to come out up here, and so I may look a little pale, but I am half Puerto Rican, half white, and my skin color is a sweet caramely brown color when I get some sunshine. I'm in this school full of all-white kids who had never really seen anybody like me before, and they didn't know what to do with me, and I didn't know necessarily what to do with them. So I experienced a lot of racism growing up, which fed into the narrative. Something's wrong with me. Why am I being treated differently as a child? And because something's wrong with me, I'm then learning very, very quickly how to fit in. And this concept of codependency and really being a chameleon of I'll be whoever you need me to be as long as I'm accepted starts to come out. Speed up into when I was 11 or 12 years old. I was sexually abused by a 14 or 15-year-old boy over the period of 3 months. And man, Alex, like it's really only been in probably the past 2 or 3 years where I've really started to understand the damage that did. Like sexual abuse reaches into the deepest parts of who we are and breaks something that ought not to be broken, you know? And so shortly after that, probably 6 months after that, and I should say that happened for about 3 months. I had already lost my voice at that point in terms of like emotionally being able to share things because of the stuff that I was experiencing. And so I had no idea or had any language on how to talk about that. And my mom discovered it, acted quickly, like police were involved, all that. So she protected me the best that she knew how at that time, and which I'm very thankful for. 6 months after that, I discovered pornography, and it was like a bomb went off in my head. It was just like, okay, this is the answer to all the pain that I'm feeling. You're telling me that I can do this whenever I want. And I, as someone as well who developed an emotional attachment disorder and the seeds of it were already there, like really that young, you're telling me I don't need anybody and I can do this on my own. Like, I'm good, man. I'm all set. And so I was hooked from the jump. 11 or 12. And then I get into high school, start messing around with girls and just get on a good sports team in a small town. And it was just like, we're off to the races here. So I'm going through my high school years severely addicted to pornography and sex already, even though I didn't really understand that. I was just like, these are just hormones. This is just what it is. And that there is some of that coming into play of puberty and all that. And so graduate high school, actually get into, I grew up in like a faith community. And so I actually get into a lot of faith work at a young age. And I start realizing like, hey, I'm actually like a communicator and I can communicate to people. And so I get into a lot of faith work from 19 to about 29 years old. And I work my way up through churches and nonprofits to the largest church in Buffalo. At the time, there was about 7,000 people there. And I worked my way out through all of that. And the entire time, as my influence started to increase, my pornography usage continued to grow. And I didn't understand how there was a correlation between my inability to regulate my emotions, but the discomfort I felt in my own body and my pornography use. Especially inside the faith world, there's a spiritual side to it too of like, okay, this is sin, this is evil. And I'm like, I can give you the intellectual knowledge. I can tell you the verses. I can even tell you the Greek and the Hebrew of the language of like what those words mean. But I can't tell you how to stop. I had no idea. There was just this dichotomy and this duality that just kept smashing into each other. And so early 20s, I meet a girl. We date for 3.5 years. I get married in 20, and neither her nor I understood. Like I was one of the many that was just like, okay, once you get married, the switch just flips and like you're good.
Yep. I'll raise my hand. I bet that was me.
Yep. And so that was my reality, where it was like I was white knuckling it for sure, trying to get into marriage of like, if I could just get in there, we'll be good. Having no concept of trauma, of recovery, of polyvagal theory in terms of understanding the body, like none of it, no framework for it. So get into marriage, married for about 3 years, and really about probably 6 months into marriage is when I started looking at porn again. I was like, okay, this is not what I thought. I thought it was just going to disappear. I thought it was going to be okay. And this has nothing to do with my wife at the time. Yeah. Nothing. This was all of the baggage that I brought in. And yeah, she brought in her own baggage, but I had enough on my side of the street to deal with on my own. And so 2018 rolls around and I get this job at this bigger church, start working my way up through there. And my pornography use is through the roof at this point. And I cannot figure out how to stop. And I'm talking with everybody about, and I'm teaching at all these different venues and networking and doing regional stuff. And all of this is great. And I'm talking about hope and redemption and all of these things. And inside, I'm a tire fire. And I'm like, I do not know how to fix this. But I did know that at some point it was going to come to a head. But I felt trapped. I'm like, I don't know how to get out of this. So 2019 rolls around and it all comes out. D-Day happens. In the recovery community, the concept of D-Day or Discovery Day, is it can be one of the best days that ever happens long term.
Yes.
But in the moment, it is a level of hell that is hard to describe for both sides. Probably even more so the betrayed side than the offender side, but it is hell for both. And so 2019, all the stuff comes out about pornography use, inappropriate emotional relationships that are happening. So I end up getting fired from my job, and the guardrails come off at that point. This job where I have this reputation, this image to maintain, all of that is gone. And so for the next 6 months, from May of 2019 to about December 2019, it is off the rails. Pornography use is as high as it's ever been. Step out on my marriage physically for the first time. And I'm in counseling for 3 times a week for 2 or 3 hours for 4 to 6 months with no real shift. And I'm like, this is pointless. Like, this just must be who I am. The lie that every person who has an addiction tells himself is that I must have been born this way, which is the furthest thing from the truth, as we know. But in the moment, that's all I can see. December 20, I wake up on my friend's front lawn. And this December in Buffalo is cold. So this is not peak weather season. So I wake up on my friend's front lawn, laying in my own vomit, just hammered. And he picks me up, brings me inside, and I have alcohol poisoning. I'm as sick as I've been. And I'm like, okay, I really need help. So I get connected with this organization called Tin Man, and they work with guys who have addiction and trauma issues. And so that was really the beginning process for me of being able to start to put language to how I was feeling, what was going on inside, and get it out. And so I remember sitting in a group with 4 other guys, and there's a laminated sheet on the ground, and it's got 8 emotions. And the guy's like, what are you feeling right now? And I'm like, I don't know. And it's like we're in kindergarten trying to learn our colors. And the guy points to the sheet, and he's like, pick one of those. And I'm like, no, and I'm angry. I was like, oh, you're angry. That's on the sheet. And it literally was me learning this, relearning this language of how to communicate. I am lonely. I have all this hurt and sadness and toxic shame is through the roof. And so, what would be a great story in some sense would be that, oh, well, I learned this language and it was great after that. And it's like, that's not been my journey to recovery, So like that was in February of 2020, right before COVID. And so the next year and a half was a lot of starts and stops of having language to figure out some of what was going on inside. I started reading all these books. I came across Jay Stringer's book called Unwanted, and a bunch of other books about the brain and understanding neuroplasticity and how the brain works. And The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk, like the OG. And all of it was great. But I didn't understand the depth of, number one, my trauma, and number two, my need for community at that time. I gotten into SA, and that was really helpful for some short period, I should say. But the whole time, me and my wife are trying to figure out, how do we put the pieces back together to this thing that's been shattered, absolutely shattered. And in December of 2021, after multiple starts and stops, and me realizing, okay, this runs deeper than I thought, my wife at the time looked at me and she's like, you either need to go to inpatient or we're done. And so at the time, I saw the road. I will never forget this. Like, I finally saw the road of what recovery was going to cost me in terms of everything I had ever known. And I looked at that and then started to make up excuses as to, like, well, it's too expensive, it's too much work, I can't get off of work. All these things that in some way, shape, or form were kind of true. But the real reason was I was afraid. Flat out. I was afraid. I saw the road and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to the other side of that. So I'm going to stay in what I know, even though it's destructive and damaging and comfortable in a sense. And so fast forward 2 months later, February 2020, I have this period for like 72 hours of like serious suicidal ideations, really considering, like, I think this is the best option for everybody, including myself. And thankfully came out of that and was like, okay, like, that's the first time it's really been that serious. And so, for me, God brought to mind from 6 months earlier, I heard a podcast with a guy named Matt Wanger on it. And I remember the way that guy talked about shame. And it just resonated with me so deeply, where I was like, he's just like, I don't need to convince these guys of what they're doing is wrong. They know that. And I was just like, finally someone's saying what I tell myself, where I'm like, I don't need you to convince me or shame me anymore. I know. What I need is a solution. So I reached out to those guys at Boulder Recovery, and then ended up going there in March of 2022, end of March into early April. And I know you know this, but for the guys that are listening to this that have never been there, it is so hard to describe what actually happens in that time. But I don't know if it was like this for you, Alex, but like, we rolled up and we all had to get into this black Sprinter van. Like, like, that is a running. So me and the guys from my group, there's 6 or 7 of us that still meet. Like, we have met every week for 2 years.
That's awesome.
We're heavily connected. I was just in San Diego 2 weeks ago, hanging out with 5 of those guys. Like, we meet multiple times a year in person. But that is a running joke. Like, whenever any of us sees a black Mercedes Sprinter van in traffic, like, a text message gets sent to the group of just like, there it is. Like, it's just part of it. So, but we get into this program and we fought for each other's souls in a way that it's so hard to accurately describe unless you've been in it. And I know you can understand that because you've been through it, but the work that happens in those 2 weeks and the reality of the depth that trauma goes, number one, the understanding that guys like Matt and Nate provide, and Doug, I don't know if Doug was there when you were there, but, and like, we affectionately, I heard Nate talk about how they listen to this podcast, and so I hope him and Matt hear this. Like, we affectionately call Nate the Wizard in my group, and we call Matt the Wizard because he just knew. Yep. Like he just knew where to poke and where to push and where to comfort, and just, it was like magic.
Yep.
It truly was a transformational experience for me. And the stuff I learned about trauma was transformational in one sense. But for me, the thing that I discovered was that I finally understood community at a level where I was like, this is everything I've ever wanted. And I didn't know it until I had it. Like I had glimpses of it throughout my life where there were these moments where it was like, okay, this seems like something real. But in those moments when, like, there was a moment where we were doing a psychodrama for me where my body actually gave out. I collapsed. My body was beyond shutdown mode into parasympathetic, where it's like, you're done. You're just done. And I fell and I just broke, where this, like, they just physically held me. And I was just like, what the hell is this place? Like, what is happening, you know? And the beauty of it was that we got to do certain things like that for the other 9 guys whenever they needed it, where it just became this brotherhood that truly transformed, for sure, 7 or 8 of the guys' lives. A couple of the guys one guy moved to Australia, so it's harder for him to connect, and the other guy's kind of disconnected. But for the other 6 or 7 that stay together, it's been truly incredible to watch the transformational process, where it's like, because we meet weekly, like, we can chime in when someone's having a bad week, and it's like, bro, 6 months ago, you wouldn't have been able to handle that the way that you did. You would have gone back out. Like, being transparent, coming back home, the first 3 months for me were really difficult to reintegrate back into the dysfunction, you know, where, like, you leave this incredibly safe environment and then you come back to the dysfunction that you left, and you're like, holy shit, like, and it's a culture shock. And so there was a period of time where I disconnected from those guys, and they kept meeting, most of them. And then I came back and have been back for however long, thankfully, for a while. But the reality of the brotherhood that's formed, that when you come out, if you can stay connected, at least for us, like, it's been transformational. Yeah. Like, we talk about it, especially in this season, where it's like, they're, you know, for me, shout out to the Well Worth It group. That's what we call ourselves. But like, just how recovery and how healing has transformed not only their personal life, but for a lot of guys that are still working. Like, one guy's an ER doc, and the way that he handles his patients is totally different. Yeah. And just hearing the stories of how they connect, and the way that one of the guys who's an HR rep handles situations, very, very different, you know, and just, it's incredible. Yeah. One of the guys who's a retired firefighter who just is mentoring young men, and how him and his wife, to us, are the example of rupture and repair, because they're both doing their own work, you know? So came out of Boulder and came home, went to my wife, was like, here's all the stuff I've learned. Here's how I actually have, like, what looks like a legit recovery plan in place. And she was like, that's really great. I'm still done. And so 2022 was spent really mourning the death of my marriage, and ended up getting divorced there. And at the end of 2022, I started to have these guys from the faith community that I used to operate in on a regional level start to reach out to me and be like, hey man, heard you're doing pretty good. We got all these guys that have all these issues and we don't know what to do. And I'm like, okay, well, have you thought about this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, if men don't have a language, number one, they're not going to be able to communicate anything of what's going on inside. Number two, if they don't have a safe place to put it, they're not going to be willing to do that either. And number three, if they've never seen it, good luck. Yeah. Like, especially in this area, good luck. You're going to need to model it for them, or you're not going to get where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And that's when I was like, okay, is this something that I could do? And so I spent the next, like, 4 or 5 months being curious about it. And then I started to just meet with guys on the side and be like, hey, this person told me to reach out to you. You're going through a tough time. You know, you're a step away from what happened to me and how I blew my life up. So if my life could be a lighthouse to you, like, then so be it. And that's when I was like, I can do this. And so I went back to school. I already had a bachelor's of science degree, and I went back to school to get a trauma-informed coaching certification. And then in early 2024, launch my business and meet with 5 or 6 guys right now as clients from all over the country. My certification is global, so I can meet with anybody anywhere. I can cross state lines and country lines technically, which is great. But man, like my story bled into obviously this desire to be like, can I provide a service for men specifically? So I only work with men because that's part of my story, where I can provide a safe place for them to just be where they are and help them get to where they want to go. With guys, either addiction recovery, I'm trained in inner child stuff to help them go through their story and figure out like where are the pain points, and specifically where are those as Boulder or BA I would say, where are those negative cognitions that take such a deep root in your heart, in your mind, in your gut, where you truly don't believe that you can bring good things into the world. Yeah. And you're operating from that belief every day. And so of course you're not going to. Yeah. Like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for you. Like you're already operating from that. And until that changes, you're not going to be able to see that you actually do bring things into the world. For me, you read it in the intro, but this is not just some hobby for me. Like anything I ask my clients to do, I've either had to do it, number one, or I've had to consider it and go, this isn't for me, but it makes sense for somebody else. I think there's obviously in the recovery community, there is the beauty of the nuance of someone who's walked the road and is walking the road, because you're going to say something and I'm going to connect with that in a way where someone who hasn't walked the road just won't be able to know that. It doesn't mean they're bad or better or worse. It just means they haven't walked the road. Yeah. So yeah, man, that's what brings me here today to this conversation.
And now you're here having a conversation with me, man. Mike, thank you for sharing all that, man. There's a lot in there that I can relate to. You know, just not having that language. I still use the feeling wheel to this day that they gave me from BAI. I literally use it in my group education classes when I teach at the treatment center. That's like the first thing that we do is we go around the room and name 3 feelings. You know, learning that you can hold conflicting feelings at the same time. And that my big thing that I'm kind of pushing on them now is like, there's no negative feelings either. There's uncomfortable feelings. Because when I put a negative label on them, I am then negatively labeling myself for having those feelings.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, they're just uncomfortable. But man, what you said about BAI and just the safety of it. And I love that you guys named your group too, because our group name was the nicest group of sex addicts you'll ever meet. Man, that the Black Spinner van, because when I was there, they hadn't converted the campus that the house is on into the clinical side. So they were throwing us in the van. They weren't throwing us into the van. We were getting into the van.
There's no blindfolds or bags or anything like that.
None of that. I went on my own free will.
Yes.
But we'd get in the van, go hike, and then they'd bus us into Boulder. And then they'd bus us back. Was that the same for you guys too?
Yeah. So we stayed in Longmont. Okay. So we didn't stay in the Berthen. We were at the Berthen house one day because we get to the clinical floor, the second floor, whatever that was in Boulder, and there was a fire, forest fire, like right behind where we were staying. They're like, yeah, we gotta go. And I'm from the East Coast, like that does not happen out here. So I'm already stressed out. I'm like, what the hell is that? And they're like, oh, it's a small one, don't worry about it. Okay. So we ended up going to the Berthen house for one of those days, but we stayed in Longmont at someone who was like a donor or something from the program had a house that they would rent out. And so we stayed at that house. There was 10 of us that stayed there.
And all love the podcast. Do you want to guest? And I was like, oh, you guys listen? And they're like, oh yeah. And then I went back for the 5-day hero journey, and Nate was like, dude, we listen to every episode. And I was like, oh, really? Wow. Like, oh, thank you so much. Like, so it's just an awesome, and I love, I think it's so cool just what they're doing to inspire people. Like you and me, and not everybody's gonna want to get into what we're doing, right? Not everybody's, and that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Yeah. I just love that it's inspired people enough to do something about it. Like I wanted to do the podcast. So I started doing the podcast. Well, then in doing the podcast, I had this opportunity to get a certification in recovery coaching. And okay, cool. Now I'm working on that and really excited to see where that takes me. It's going to take me out of the corporate rat race that I'm just not fulfilled at. And for you to also be inspired, because I'm assuming before BAI, before recovery, was it in your plans to become, a coach in any type of way?
No,
Yeah,
absolutely not. No, for sure not. It's directly a result of the past 5 years for me, where probably 2 years into recovery, my counselor at the time was like, "Hey, I want you to think about this, not necessarily right away, but I want you to think about this is an option." Because he was a coach himself and coach / counselor. And he was unbelievably helpful for me, especially in the early years of really helping me to work out the language to figure out what is going on inside. And so at the time, there was just so much tumultuous activity and indecision with, marriage, separation, divorce looming, things like that. Like I just wasn't ready for it. And so 2023 was when I really explored it. And yeah, I mean, dude, the BAI guys and the Boulder guys, they're great. Like I talk to Shane often as well. And for any of the BAI or Boulder Recovery alum listening, if you go to the Explore tab, this just happened a couple weeks ago. Like my trauma-informed coaching business is listed there as a resource. Feel free to check that out, and they're great.
Hey guys, I just want to take a minute to share something deeply personal and transformative in my journey of recovery. I've been where you might be right now, struggling with the weight of addiction and feeling lost. But there's a place that offered me a new beginning, a place I truly believe in. It's called Begin Again Institute. At Begin Again, they understand the deep-rooted trauma behind addiction. Their 14-day intensive program for men tackles the neurobiological aspects of addiction head-on. It's not just about breaking a habit. It's about understanding and healing the underlying trauma that formed it in the first place. And for those who have been impacted by betrayal, Begin Again extends care to partners of addicts too. Their partner support program is offered at no additional cost to the family and runs alongside the men's intensive. This program helps participants gain an understanding of the trauma they've experienced and sets them on their own path to healing. If you or someone you love are grappling with sexual addiction, pornography addiction, or intimacy issues, Begin Again Institute can be that pivotal step towards recovery and a new lease on life. Remember, you can't go back and change the past, but it's never too late to begin again. To learn more about their life-changing program, visit beginagaininstitute.com or call 720-776-9076 to reserve your spot in the next 2-week intensive. I promise, it'll be the best call that you ever make for yourself. Stay strong, keep fighting, and keep tuning in to No Lions Here for more conversations about recovery, resilience, and hope.
Yeah, it was not in my plans. Yeah. This is a direct result of recovery for me and really getting to a spot where I'm like, okay, like I feel like I can help guys. And in return of being of service, I'm also receiving from them while I'm doing it too. Yeah. Like it's not just a one-way street. Like there is the coach-client feeling. But I tell my guys often, I'm like, dude, you don't understand what this is doing for me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm happy to help you, but you say something and I'm writing that down or typing it out because I'm like, that's gold.
Yeah.
Like, I need to hear that for myself.
Yeah, I have definitely found that, I also too had the experience of when I was at BAI, they had a guy in from Tennessee and he was just kind of shadowing because they were getting ready to switch over to the Integrated Life Network. And he pulled me aside on one of the last days and was like, hey, man, you should really think about a career change. And I was like, what? And he was like, counseling. And then he said, but hey, man, make sure you get your recovery in line first, right? You need to get solid in your work, in your own recovery before. And absolutely, kind of like what you said, like getting back from treatment. I mean, entry into the real world was a struggle. And I mean, that struggle lasted me about a year, honestly, like where, I was staying connected, hitting meetings, getting therapists, like get a sponsor. I was doing the things that I was doing, but I was just still so much conflict, so much internal conflict.
Mhm.
Honestly, it's really been within the last 6 months that I've kind of had a breakthrough just in perspective around like, okay, wow, I'm at a certain level of peace and contentness
Yeah.
that I've never felt before in my life. And holy shit, this feels good. Like,
Mhm.
wow, all of the hard things that I've had to go through over the last 3 years, it's all worth it because look at where I'm at now and look at the way I'm feeling and just the self-awareness that I've been able to gain. It's like, wow. And I want to pass that along to somebody else. And like you said, it was funny. I actually sat down with one of the directors at the treatment center that I work at, and I know that in getting into the industry and the field of, hey, like I still have my own recovery that I need to take care of. Me going into the treatment center is not part of my recovery plan. And I still got to hit my meetings and make my phone calls and do my other things. However, I was talking to one of the higher ups, and he was like, this is not service work. This is not service work. And I understand the idea behind that. However, it is service work to me. Because when I go in, it's not about me. It's about them. And there's things that they say that I was asking them the other day. I was like, all right, how many of you feel like you can be of service right now? And everybody was like, nope. And I was like, bullshit. Like you absolutely can be. Whether you're in this program for a day or 20 years, you have an experience to offer that somebody can learn from.
Yeah.
And I'm always
Yeah, I think that's the beauty. Yeah, I think that's the beauty behind it is when you realize that your experience, strength, and hope that you have can directly affect someone else, and you actually see that you can bring something good into the world. Like that can be a huge shift. And like, what is step 12? Right? Like step 12 is, hey, what you've been given, now go and give that to somebody else, the short version of what it actually is, right? And so like, to me, it's like, well, that translates anywhere and everywhere. Totally agree with what you're saying, where it's like, hey, my client meetings don't count as my meetings, or like your group work doesn't count as your meeting for sure. You need a place where you can just go and be. Like there have been multiple times we meet on Wednesday nights. There have been like times where I'm like, hey, you have told me that this is a safe space, and now you're gonna hear it. Like, so I'm like, I gotta get this out. Like, here's what's going on, and like, I don't have a ton of places to put this, and this is one of them. So like, and they always receive it. Like, it's funny how there are times where I'm still shocked, where it's like there is enough relational equity and clout where I don't like the word should anymore because it's typically associated with shame, but I ought not be surprised. And I still am in a good way. I'm just like, okay, here's a really dark part of me, or here's this crazy thing I'm thinking or feeling. And I love the fact that you said that you're trying to help guys understand that there's no negative emotions. We can experience them in a strong or, as we perceive, negative way. But they are just emotions. They just are. They're not negative. And the sooner that we can understand that they're not negative, the sooner that we can understand that they're just emotions. And yeah, sometimes they're big and scary for sure. And I don't know if there will be a time where I think they get less big and less scary, but there's always going to be some level of that because it's just part of the human experience. But it's more about having a place to go, hey, here's what I'm feeling. Here's the thoughts that are spinning through my head, and I need to get them out because I know that if they stay in there, they're going to wreak havoc. And so love the fact that you said that, but just helping guys to understand, and even for myself, like I carry around, let me see if I can do this right. These two things right here. This is a rock. I've been meeting with a trauma therapist for about 2 years. And this rock is about 3 months old from when I got it. And it was when I finally had done enough work to where I could look at myself in the mirror and go, there are no bad parts. And I actually believed it. Like in my gut, like mind, heart, and gut actually believed, hey, plenty of brokenness left in there for sure. Lots of work to do. No bad parts. just bad rolls. That was a huge shift for me. And the second thing that I carry around is this coin that I got last year from a guy who I met in me and another guy befriended him in some of the faith work we were doing. And he ends up getting clean from a lot of different narcotics. And last time I saw him, I updated him on my journey. And so he was receiving a new coin in like 2 months. And so he's like, I want you to have this. And this is his 12-year sobriety coin.
Wow.
That he's like, I want you to have this because I'm getting my new one. And those are just little tokens for me to remember I can bring good things into the world. Because there are still plenty of days where I'm like, I'm spinning this coin in my pocket because the narratives are spinning in my head and my heart of, like all the shit that I did, all the bad stuff that I did, all the relationships that were destroyed. And there were many, for sure. But I own that and go, I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to hide from it. And I don't have to be controlled by it anymore. I can bring good things into the world. And if I can actually believe that, number one, it creates some of the peace that you're talking about, because the turmoil inside, even when I got out of Boulder, was still it was actually probably higher because they unearthed a bunch of stuff and you're like, okay.
Yeah, we were in there with the big wooden spoon, just stirring it up.
Yeah. And so coming home, it was so important for me to get connected with a trauma therapist. And that also, at least where I was, it took 6 months. Like I got on waiting lists and I had to wait. And so part of the reintegration process was that I didn't hit the ground fully running with good help. But when I finally did, the stuff that started to get disarmed in my body, in my mind, in my experience was so pivotal because I stopped stepping on the same landmines, because those landmines were getting disarmed underneath and going, okay, that memory sucks, but it only has to suck. It doesn't have to set me off.
Yeah.
But that takes work, like coming back and going, okay, like now the real work actually begins. Like one of the worst and best things that Matt said when we were there was, it was like the Friday before when we left. And he's like, all of this work was to get you guys back to the starting line. And I was like, fuck you, man. Like, come on, dude. Like, what do you mean? Like, do you know what we just went through? Like, did you see all the tears that were shed, the multiple sleepless nights because I couldn't figure out, like, some of the stuff you were saying, and just like, but he was right. Spot on. Like, just, it was when we came home, and it was about 6 months in where we were looking at each other like, this is nutty.
Yeah.
Like, but what's also crazy is where we are now.
Yeah.
2 years, we were in San Diego, and we actually got to join a Zoom call with a group that was in the birthing house, and they were a weekend on a Saturday night. And we got off that call and we just looked at each other and we were like, look at where we are now. Like, we were those guys that were just like terrified. And now we're less terrified, and there's some stability and growth in all of us. And so it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, the purpose of the newcomer in the rooms, looking at them, you're having a bad day, go call somebody that's, that's newer in the program, and you're going to feel a whole lot better about yourself when you do that. And oh yeah, man. Oh man. I'm trying to think, there were some things you said in there. Sorry, sometimes my processing, I'm trying to sift through.
Okay.
Yeah, man, I don't know, just you're right, man. Some of the things that Matt said and did, and there was one guy in my cohort that was very distraught after the last day, because they were like, "Hey guys, you're not done. This was the running start. This was a running start. You're not done. You got to get a therapist, you got to get a sponsor, you got to do 90 and 90 And I remember there was a guy that was just so distraught after that, because he, had, I guess, some kind of belief that was it. After we got out of that 14 days, we were good and good to go. Now, I'm thankful looking back on it now that I did not have that belief, and that I was ready to hit the ground running. Now, were my motives for myself? No, they weren't. They were to get back the girl that I had lost due to my addiction. The girl that told me I was a sex addict, the girl that I look back on that D-Day and I say, I'm really grateful for that day.
Yeah.
that was the best and worst day of my life,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know, and I'm really proud of her for throwing down a boundary and saying, get out,
Yeah.
you know, because
Yeah.
if she would have taken me back, because it was about a month after the breakup that I went to BAI. So if any point in time during that month, she would have been like, all right, man, come on back. I miss you. I love you. Come on back. I don't know that I'd be sitting where I am today,
Yeah.
because I would have got
Yep.
complacent and, promises on empty promises that I had told her in the past around my porn use and my cocaine addiction. Like, and so to look back on that now and be like, I'm grateful for her, grateful for, I hope that, my motivation wasn't for me. Now it is for me. And
Yeah.
it's like, and then just the idea of knowing and feeling, right? For me, I'm very intellectual. Like, I know things, but I don't always feel
Mhm.
them. And now I'm really starting to connect those with my recovery of just, wow, I can feel that
Yeah.
this is working and I can feel the change.
Yeah. One of the best things I heard early on was that men use their head to hide their
Mm.
hearts. And most of us, especially growing up in a culture where, honestly, until very recently, maybe 10 years, maybe less, where it's become more socially acceptable to talk about this type of stuff, in our most formative years, number one, most of us didn't have examples of men who were doing it, if we had men in our life at all. And number two, culture reinforced what it meant to be a
Yeah.
man. And so, like, most of us learn how to use our intellect to hide the pain that we carry deep down inside from the traumatic events or the abandonment, the neglect, the lack of care, whatever that happened to us, which is stored in our bodies. And we carry all of that around all the time on a conscious and mostly subconscious level. And so part of recovery for me has been recovering my body
Mm.
and allowing my body to not be an adversary, which has been one of the hardest things for me, is really viewing my body as an ally and going, okay, can I actually be in tune with my head, my heart, and my gut? Can there be some form of alignment and not just distress all the time inside? And can I learn that my body is not my enemy, but my body is actually my ally? And that when feelings or sensations or things do come up, it's because it's trying to tell me something that's going on. And since I carry this little rock around, and since I've been reconnected with my gut for the past couple months, the shifts that have happened in my life, some of them that have been very, 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 very difficult to look at relationships and listen and go, and which is like the worst thing, because it's like sometimes the worst decisions or the hardest decisions are the right ones to go, yeah, this is not, so fresh. It's just difficult. And so, but the amount of times in the past 3 months that my gut has been right about situations and that I've listened to it and now I'm learning how to bring language to it is alarming in the sense of, like, I'm pretty sure it's probably been this way most of the time. I've just buried
Yeah.
it for whatever reason, And so getting reconnected with my body, living in my body, not being afraid to live in my body, and also being able to communicate that stuff to other men, not just other people, but other men, has been transformative for me. It's been absolutely transformative. And it's also redefined for me the concept of
Yeah.
masculinity, of, if
Yes.
this isn't my term, but the concept of mindful masculinity, of going, I'm not over here on what was perceived as toxic masculinity. I'm not over here on the feminization of masculinity, but I'm in the middle to go, like, there are moments to be tough, to be the defender, to be the one that is like, I will protect. And there's other moments where we need to take our armor off and cry our
Yep.
brains out because this was awful.
Mm-hmm.
And we need a space for all of it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because I think in society, as a man, men are. I'm supposed to know everything. I'm supposed to be the provider, the protector, and I'm supposed to just not show emotions and just push through. I'm supposed to suck it up and push through. And I call bullshit on that. Like, what is it for me to be a man? I cry. I cry. I feel my feelings are big. I'm sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm, sometimes I'm just a big baby, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. And so really
Yeah.
pushing back on that, and just breaking the silence around, like, hey guys, we can feel our feelings, and that is okay. That is welcomed. It's actually going to make you a better partner and better father, better friend. I mean, it's going to enhance your life 100-fold if you can get in
Mm-hmm.
touch with those feelings and express those feelings and feel those feelings. And they're there they serve a purpose. They're trying to tell us
Yeah.
what is going on, and I need to listen to them. You talked about kind of, your body being an ally, and kind of listening to your body. I've been dealing with something recently that's kind of thrown me off. I find that I've kind of come out of this like long-term fight or flight, where my
Mm-hmm.
body is just
Mm-hmm.
constantly on edge. My nervous system is so tightly wound. And through a series of different things that I'm doing for myself, I'm to the point now where, man, like, I need a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, I'm not depressed. I know I'm not depressed, but like there's days where like I have trouble getting out of bed because I'm so
Mm-hmm.
tired. And I read somewhere where, when your body comes out of that constant long-term fight or flight, your body needs to catch up to the rest.
Oh yeah.
And in reading that, I was able to give myself grace and be like, hey man,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so you know what? You called off of the day job today. You needed sleep. I needed to sleep for
Mm-hmm.
12 hours. And that
Yeah.
I didn't sleep for 12 hours because I'm a piece of shit. I slept for 12 hours
Yes.
because I'm at peace and content, and my body is trying to catch up.
Yeah. The ability to reframe that mentally is really, really,
Really
really
difficult.
hard when you have this workaholism where you either use it to escape or it was a sense of value that was instilled to you, which again, working hard is a beautiful thing. It's a good thing. It's a necessary thing. I just had this exact conversation with somebody last night where they're starting their own work in trauma therapy. And I was like, hey, just give yourself grace and space if you're exhausted all the time. You're unloading. And in their particular case, it's like you're unloading serious trauma of all sorts of things that would rank very, very high on the ACE score test. So give yourself grace and space, and like you're gonna have to juggle: am I depressed or am I not? The exact thing you said, where it's like you're probably not. Your body is just doing so much work that you can't see, that you need to understand this going into it and give yourself the space and the rest that you need. Because if you don't, you're going to be fatigued all the time. You're probably going to be pretty miserable to be around because your body's actually trying to tell you, shut it down. Like, this is a season of rest right now. Don't be going out super late, whatever. And I remember the first year of trauma therapy, and even still sometimes, like, for me, trauma therapy session is an hour. I would come home and I'm like exhausted. And it's like 3 p.m. And I'm like, I'm ready for bed right now because of what I just did in that session to unload some of that stuff and get rid of it. And so that's a very, very, very normal response. One of the guys actually in the BAI meeting was talking about how he was frustrated because he's like, it's like it was the Saturday before the hike on Sunday, and you get like the back half of Saturday off, and he's like, this is stupid. Why do I need a nap? Why do I need? And I'm like, we're trying to express to him, dude, the work that you're doing. Like, I know you always need to be doing something, but what you need to be doing is resting. And I know that's hard to understand because you're coming from a pattern of just go, 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 go. But that pattern also led you to BAI. It's one of many factors that led you there. And so, like, being able to reframe that is a hard process. But if you can learn to just be, which is, in my opinion, that's where I've really worked to try to figure out, okay, how do I just be, and how do I enjoy the journey? Like, be in the moment, be present, enjoy the journey. And if the journey is napping, if the journey is going, I don't have it today, then that's what it is. But if it's also going, no, like building a business, it's like, no, like it's grind time. It's time to grind. Okay, that's what it is, whatever is required. But it's also learning, listening to my body and going, hey, you know what? Right now, you just need to sleep. And if I do a quick scan, it's like nothing is wrong. This is just such like addict thinking of like the world's on fire. It's like, no, you're just tired, bro.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
That's all it is.
That's all it is, right? Like, just for me, speaking for myself, it's like the world's on fire. It's like, no, you just slept like 4 hours for the past 3 nights, like each night. Like you just need more sleep. That's it. And you'll wake up tomorrow and it'll be just fine.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The days that I allow myself to sleep and, be a little productive, still productive, but just like, man, I needed that. Like at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I'm so happy that I did that for myself. Listening to the body, the mental gymnastics that go on are almost at an Olympic level when it comes to trauma work, this kind of recovery, and that in itself is just like you said, it's exhausting. And no one, I really wasn't prepared for that. I'll have I know that after full days at the treatment center, I come home and it's 5:30, and I'm like, I'm done. I can't. And that's not even me necessarily sharing my story. It's just listening and being there for others that also takes it out of me too. And I'm like, I'm done. I need to just go to bed.
I think the interesting thing that I'm discovering over the past year is how much energy I do have, particularly how much energy I used to put into my addiction. And then beyond that, taking that a step further, how much energy my body exerted to bury all my trauma at any given moment, all the time. Because you talked about it, it's survival mode. You're not in thriving mode, you're in survival mode. And so what I realized was that like over the past year, I'm like, man, I got to put my hands to stuff because I have all this energy now that I didn't used to have. And now I need to redirect it to something healthy and not redirect it back toward addiction. And so I think for people listening, like the other thing to understand is just ask yourself the question, if you've had serious trauma is not even the right word because that's subjective to the experience of the person. I want to be sensitive to that. If you've had anything that you would consider trauma, and if for most of us there's typically more than one thing, many of us have, if we take the ACE score, adverse childhood experience of like, of the 10 questions, if something bad happened, most of us will score at least a 1, maybe a 2. Many of us will score a lot higher than that. Those things stack and compound. And not only do they compound, but just like financials, they compound with interest over time. And we develop either these maladaptive behaviors or these things in our body that we think are just aging. But it's like, yeah, part of it's aging because your cortisol levels of you releasing those chemicals all the time are wearing out your organs. And that has an effect. And so think about that. And that's what I try to tell some of the guys that I work with, where I'm like, this is going to be some work for sure. But number 1, you will quit on yourself before I do. And number 2, there is another side, and it's better than where you are now. Because right now, you've described yourself as fatigued, angry, rageful, lonely, all these things. And what would it look like to take that same energy and put it into your recovery? And what could that mean for you and your family? And so for some of the guys, I had a guy shoot me a text where he's like, hey, we've been meeting for 2 months now. And disclaimer, he said I could share this. So not just here, but publicly. So for HIPAA's sake, so I don't get sued, there is full consent on this particular thing. And I asked him this question in the first meeting where I'm like, hey, man, anger is actually a really good and healthy thing when it's understood properly. But my question for you is, how is your anger serving you positively right now? And he's like, it's not. And I'm like, okay, so what do you want to do with that? He's like, I don't know. That was 2 months ago. Last week he sent me a text message. He's like, I have been chewing on that question for a month and a half, and I'm realizing how it's poisoning me. And then he just started to implement all these things into place, and I'm like, that's movement.
Yep.
That's what we're going for, because your anger is causing you all these physical things, but it's also causing all this relational stress in your dynamics of your work life, of your home life, of you being a parent, all these things. So anger is not bad by itself, but when anger turns into rage, now we got an issue. And so it started with me just asking him, what's going on in your body? And it led to that question. It's like, if we understood how much energy gets used all the time just to survive, just to keep the trauma buried. What would happen if we redirected that energy slowly into working through it so that you can release it? Who would you be then?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's really cool that I'm sure for you to hear, to pose those questions to people and then to have them come back and say, hey, man, I've really been chewing on that. And you're right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yes, I
Mm-hmm.
see what you're saying. I see why you asked that. Here's what I can do, trying to find a solution, right? I'm very big on let's find a solution to this,
Mm-hmm.
because you get plenty of people in meetings that aren't solution based.
Yeah.
And then that alone can drain you, so I like to try to, I got to surround myself with people that are solution based, seeking the solution,
Yeah.
not necessarily. Now, I have struggled with picking up that shovel and just digging. I got to dig down, and once I get to that, that's going to help me find the solution. Whereas today, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, I see that. I'm not going to pick up the shovel, though. I'm going to talk about it and pray about it. And in time, this will make sense.
Yeah.
This will make sense in time.
It's a balance. It's a balance for sure. Sometimes it's the biggest transformation. One of the biggest transformations for me was excavating this gigantic piece of myself that I buried when I was 1.5 years old, for sure. But what led up to that was a lot of solution-based things to get my body to be disarmed, to actually get to that spot. So for me, it's a both and. It's trying to figure out, okay, from a coaching perspective, for me, for sure, it's especially with guys, it's about solutions. Because they're like, okay, we'll talk about my feelings, but what do I need to do? And it's like, okay, yeah, for sure. Like, let's talk about that. Like, here's some things you can try throughout the week. But it's also a space where I'm like, dude, you've done a ton of work today. And right now, just for this week, I just want you to stick with that. It's what I want you to do. We'll come up with solutions along the way, but like, you need to chew on that for a little bit, because that's a big thing, And so helping guys to balance the need to fix, because we're fixers to a fault, especially in, relationships with partners where, she's telling me something. I'm like, okay, well, here's what you need to do. She's like, shut the hell up. Like, I just want you to hear me. I don't need you to help me right now. I just want you to hear. And I'm like, that is a question I've brought into my own life. I'm like, okay, are you looking for me to help you or just to hear you? Because that also shifts my mindset to go like, all right, just shut up and listen. Or, no, actually, I'm looking for solutions. Okay, great. And that allows me to lean in and go, okay, now I'm going to think about this from much more problem solving versus just strictly curious as a ear.
Shout out to guys for being just natural problem solvers. That is
Yes.
that is what we do. And I love the point there about, like, hey, you've done a lot of work today. You need to just sit with this. I know for myself, and I know other guys in the program, I used to try to hide within recovery work. Okay, I'm feeling a certain type of way. I don't want to feel this anymore, so I'm just going to dive into recovery work. When it's like, man, it's in theory, that's good, right? That's better than the alternative of going and being in my addiction. However, at the same time, there's things that aren't getting done when I'm in that kind of mode. So I can be doing all the recovery work in the world, but if I'm not in the right place and if I'm not doing it for the right reasons, nothing's going to get accomplished.
Yeah. It's a tricky balance. That's also a tricky balance too, because typically there's typically big emotions tied to negative cognitions or like core negative beliefs. And so like you have to figure out like, okay, like for me, I should say, thinking from like a coaching perspective, it's like, okay, if I ask this question or if this guy sits with us too long, is this going to set him off in a way where he's going to go and act out? And that's determined leading into the event itself. Like, hey, where are you today? I'm in a good spot. Okay. Well, you sat with this for 20 minutes before, and I do somatic work a lot of really helping guys get reconnected with their body, because I'm like, the answers you're looking for are in the places you don't want to go, and I get that. So let's figure out how to slowly go there together. I don't want you to fully do some of this stuff on your own, not yet, but we'll do it together. But if the guy can sit with the emotion, even just in a coaching call where I'm like, dude, you sat with your sadness and we discovered a part that is like wounded, and you now have the ability to communicate with that part. But not only that, you just sat with that sadness for 15 minutes. You talked about how you run away from that, like at first thought. So it's helping them to see, I'm like, you can do this. You were actually made to do it. It's just that trauma's hijacked these things inside of you, and your body's telling you this is a threat, which in some ways it is. But now you're seeing that you're not going to die. And that's the big phrase in recovery is like, hey, I sat with this or I grieved that, I didn't die. Because you always think I'm going to die.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like when you can help them see that and go, hey, you can slowly start to do this, because the goal is, if you can, self-regulation. And then if you can't for whatever reason, what does co-regulation actually look like? And so you're always trying to get them to self-regulate it first. But if you can't, that's where the phone calls, that's where community is so important to go, hey, like the amount of times where like I've either called somebody or on a Wednesday night call where I'm like, I need you guys to tell me who I am, because I just cannot remember today. And I'm like, that is so important for me.
That is.
Because if I don't have that space, I'm going to slip back into these voices that are telling me, hey, you did this, you did that. And it's like, yeah, oh, that's true. But that's not who I am anymore. And those guys can provide me with concrete things of like, this is who you are. That's right. Okay. And that helps me to get out of my shame cycle. But I can only get out of my shame cycle if I this is really, I know we're running a little bit long, but this is really important. The difference in my mind between toxic shame and healthy shame. And some people have a different definition for healthy shame. They'll call it need or whatever. But toxic shame is something's wrong with me. I am blank. I'm broken. I'm irreparably blah, 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 blah. Causes isolation, first and foremost, inside the person. Kurt Thompson, a doctor, wrote a really good book on this called The Soul of Shame. And he talks about like the physical response inside the body, where the PFC, your frontal lobe, disconnects from your limbic in a sense. And now you're trapped in here, and all your logic and your consequences and all that are just turned off. You're stuck in toxic shame. One of the only ways to get out of toxic shame is for an external force to come in and shake you out of the rhythm. But what healthy shame does is it recognizes the limit and the need of who I am as a person and gets me to say the very three words that are so difficult to say, especially for men. I need help. The three words that we loathe saying as men because we're strong, and if you're like me and my attachment style is avoidant, I'll figure it out, I got it, all the bullshit I tell myself. But what healthy shame does is it says, I need your help right now because I'm spinning over here and I can't seem to get out. So can you just remind me of who I am? And I don't think that's weakness. I think that's actually strength to go, hey, I've been trying to figure it out on my own and I can't. So can you just remind me? And that snaps me out of this shame spiral and cycle and goes, oh yeah, that's right. Like I wouldn't have done that 6 months ago in a good way, or I would have done that in a bad way and I'm not doing that. Like all that's really important to hear.
Yeah. I love that, man. I love that. I love asking, and I just love asking, asking for help, right? And reminding me who I am. And, I was definitely, talking to the group yesterday at the treatment center about like positive belief inventories that I have them do on themselves. And I'm like, hey guys, if you're stuck, ask someone around you. Hey, what are the good things?
Yeah.
One guy was having trouble coming up with those things. And I said, all right, everybody, let's go around the room. What good things do you have to say about him? And they all start naming good things. And I'm like, there you go, man. There you go. Now
that's BAI right there. Like, that's the BAI influence all day.
Like, all right, cool. That was really. And again, man, that's what's so great about these conversations is I'm gonna take things from this conversation that I'm gonna apply to my own life and my own recovery.
Yeah.
And they're gonna help me out for the better. And then I get to pass these along to other people down the line. So, man, Mike, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I mean, there's, we could go so much deeper into all of these different things, and I'd love to have you back on, man. Maybe we'll pick up some topics and come back on and discuss them, and because I definitely definitely got some more, some more stuff that we could talk about. So, but man, Mike,
For sure, man.
I just really appreciate you coming on, man. This is an awesome conversation. I had a
Yeah.
blast, and again, I'm really excited to release this and just let people learn from the experience, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for your time, for your platform, and just your own journey, and just you saying things where I'm like, oh, this dude gets it. Like just certain phrases and things where I'm like, he gets it. He knows the road. He knows what he's talking about. Just real quick, if anybody, just gonna do a
Absolutely,
quick
man.
shameless
Please
plug,
do. Please do. Please do.
um, recovery coaching, trauma informed coaching, whether it be to walk through, do story work, which I love, addiction recovery work, I love, or if it's just like, hey, I got some stuff that happened, I'm not totally sure what to do and how to move forward. That's part of what I'm trained to do. And so if you just go to www.waywardcoaching.com, or if you want to shoot me an email at mike@wayward, we'll figure it out. And like I said earlier on, I do work most of the time with men, very rare cases, short-term stints to try to figure out what's going on. I'll work with a female, but it's primarily men. And so, Alex, man, thanks for having me on. Thanks for your platform and your voice. And it's so cool to hear where you've come from, where you are, and where you're going, and just to be a part of that.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, thank you again, man. I really appreciate it. I'm going to put your information, everything that you just plugged is going to be in the description of this episode. Definitely go check out everything that Mike's doing, man. Great stuff. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you're doing, man. It's huge.
Yeah. Thank you. Last thing, and I forgot to mention this. I was on a podcast last week. I said it earlier, certification is global. So I'm based out of Buffalo, New York, but I have clients in Kansas, California, Florida, Ohio, like all over. And so if you find yourself not in Buffalo and you're open to remote coaching, it's totally an option.
Honestly, man, COVID's it did some things for, remote
Yes.
stuff that like, hey, remote coaching, remote jobs, like COVID definitely, kind of opened us up to a new way of connecting virtually.
Yeah, I hated Zoom in 2020, and now I'm a big proponent of it because it definitely changed it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, man, I'll definitely have you back on. And again, just thank you again for coming on, your willingness, man. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much for everybody joining me on my journey. Remember, it works if you work it. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, and you're worth it. I'll see you guys next time.